This episode is made possible by our generous patrons. To learn more, visit patreon.com/ink2film.
Welcome to the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book.
And then see the movie.
I'm Luke.
And I'm James.
And this week we discuss the first part of Michael Crichton's 1990 sci-fi thriller, Jurassic Park. Here we are, Jurassic Park. This is one of the projects I've been looking forward to since we started this podcast, James.
Oh yeah, beloved story in my eyes. I mean, it literally set me on a path through my life. Yeah, because early on, this was a big factor in why I wanted to be like a paleontologist when I was like really, really young. And for whatever reason, I saw it when I was really young. And
okay, crazy. I didn't know you wanted to be a paleontologist when you were young. Did you know that I also wanted to be a paleontologist when I was young?
I think Caitlin may have mentioned something about it, and I thought that was crazy. So I was gonna see where you kind of landed on that.
That's funny, man. Yeah, so I've always wanted to be a writer, with one exception. Before I wanted to be a writer, I wanted to be a paleontologist. But I guess the difference is this movie and book had nothing to do with that.
Oh, really?
In fact, a little bit of the opposite, because I wanted to be a paleontologist right up until around the point I saw this movie. Well, we're going to talk about the book, but when I saw the movie, it freaked me out so much that I kind of stopped being obsessed with dinosaurs.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. This is one of my early memories of being terrified in a theater was during this movie. But we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. I guess we should talk a little bit about what the podcast is, and then we can talk more about our relationship to this material. But just in case anyone's checking us out for the first time, what we do here is we read a book over multiple parts. We do a really deep dive into it, kind of react to it, not really scene by scene, but definitely get into the nitty gritties of everything. That's why we separate it over multiple parts. So this week we're going to get into, if you've read the book, you know that there are 7 iterations. Is how it's kind of broken up. And we are going to cover first and second iterations, which are pretty introductory. But we'll get into those and talk about the characters and everything. And that's going to be our plan for this week. And then we'll have 2 more book episodes coming out the following weeks. And then we'll follow that up finally with the movie episode.
So the thing I wanted to say about the 2 iterations that we covered this week is just that I started this book and I was so excited to really, really get into it. And it was almost immediate, it just flew by, and I was almost oh my gosh, I need to keep reading immediately. I had to stop myself from wanting to continue because we got to this really great part, and I was really enthralled.
That's a hallmark of thrillers. That's kind of how they're when a thriller is doing its job. That's how they should be. They should be books you don't want to put down. They should be super engaging, very easy to read typically. And that's something that's always impressed me about Crichton is that he blends that thriller pacing with a sci-fi premise. So there is actually a good bit of science in there. Now I know he takes flack for it not always being super accurate, but there's still obviously research and care taken to what he's putting in there. And you would think that would really bog it down and kill the pacing, but it doesn't. I don't know. In my opinion, it doesn't. He finds a really good balance for it.
Yeah, and he definitely, come on, he knows the names of these dinosaurs and specific ways that they would be excavated, the bones and everything. And so he definitely does a good amount of research, and I was pretty struck by that, just all like you're saying, all the data and all the research that's put on display mixed with how much it's so readable.
So, which brings me to another point. I've never read this book before. I've seen the movie, but this is all new to me. And, other than the similarities to the movie, obviously. So I'm really getting into this. It's like revisiting Jurassic Park. And in that way, it's really cool, right? Because it's one of my favorite movies. And instead, I'm reading something that's even superior to a novelization of it because it was actually what it was based off of. So it's I'm going to the source and I'm getting all this cool stuff that I can't believe. I really guess what I'm trying to say is I can't believe I haven't read this book by now. Because as I'm getting into it, I'm really enjoying it. I'm this is so cool. I don't know. I'm so glad we're covering it.
And I mean, with the benefit of hindsight and seeing all these movies that have come out now, like Lost World and Jurassic Park 3 and now the Jurassic World, we're seeing like how certain things were left out of the original film, and then things were picked out of the book to like kind of thread into some of the other movies. So I find that kind of interesting to see. And I guess right off the bat, I should say that like, although I love this project and I love this movie, I really feel like the only Jurassic Park movie is the first one. So I don't know if that's going to bring any haters around or anything, but like it's like it stands alone as like everything else is on a totally inferior level.
Well, I feel you there, man. I guess I have it's head and shoulders above all the other Jurassic Park movies for sure. But I do have like different ones that I like. You know what I mean? That I like for different reasons. Maybe I don't love them. They're not classics to me. Or in like the most recent Jurassic World, I thought was okay. It was entertaining, but it wasn't an instant classic or anything for me either. Speaking of Lost World, I think if we end up like I mean I'm already loving this project, so I think it's potential that we could return for that one day, because that is Michael Crichton sequel written.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to. I just want it to be known, like, where I stand with this material. Oh, and speaking of material, I guess we should kind of, you were saying your history with the material. You've obviously seen the movie, and you hadn't read the book. I saw the movie when I was young, like I was saying, and it did set me down like this really interesting path where I was like, I want to be a paleontologist. I want to study dinosaurs. I want to, like, it was such a dream of mine. And I had all the encyclopedias. I had all the toys, like, you know what I mean? The little, like, every different species of dinosaur. I knew like almost all their names. And like all of that knowledge, a lot of that knowledge at least, is completely out the window. Like I don't remember a lot of those names. I don't remember.
Yeah, same. Yeah, and it's amazing, how that happens.
I mean, honestly, it was probably one of the first books that I read. Like I got really into like Harry Potter when I was younger, and some of those other ones. But once I had read a lot of the young stuff, I moved on to and this was one of the first ones I was like, oh, Jurassic Park, I have to read Jurassic Park. So I have read it, but it's been a very long time.
Cool, man. Well, I'm excited to get into our sort of summary and breakdown. But before we do that, I thought we'd talk a little bit about Michael Crichton, since I didn't know much about him, honestly, going into this project. So I don't know. Do you know much about him?
I think he did some script work, right? I think he wrote some screenplays as well as writing novels.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, he's definitely had many of his books adapted. But let's go back to the beginning. His name is actually John Michael Crichton. So he uses his middle name as his first name for his, I guess, like kind of a pen name, but not really. But that's what he goes by. So that's interesting. It's the first time I think I've seen that.
If I did that, my name would be my dad's name, like completely. Because my first name is my middle name is my dad's first name. So I would literally
so give it to us. What would it be?
David Bailey.
David Bailey. All right. Yeah. Well, I would be Paul Elliott. How does that strike you?
That's like pretty good author name.
Yeah, I've never been a big fan of the name Paul. But you know what? In recent years, it's kind of grown on me a little bit. So, yeah, I feel you. Anyway, so Michael Crichton, John Michael Crichton, born in 1942, died in 2008 at only 66 years old, which I think is pretty young. And it's a shame because he wrote many novels that got adapted into films. Before we get into that, grew up in New York. Seems like he was always brilliant, always extremely smart kid. Studied at Harvard when he was 18, wanting to be a writer. During his undergraduate study in literature, he conducted an experiment to expose a professor who he believed was giving him abnormally low marks and criticizing his literary style. So he informed another professor of his suspicions and then submitted an essay written originally by George Orwell under his own name and received a B- on it from the professor in question.
That's awesome.
So that was his experiment where he exposed this professor.
Well, it's funny because grading is so subjective that like even something written by George Orwell could be potentially given a B, you know?
Yeah. And man, I feel like this kind of shit wouldn't fly today. I don't know. I don't know if I approve of this technique. It sounds it's pretty, what it is it's pretty ballsy. That's what it is. You know what I mean? Like it shows that he's got a real, like he really believes in himself, I guess. Right?
Yeah.
So I guess more power to him. So then later he enrolled in medical school and actually got a medical degree. He was also 6'9".
Holy crap. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So crazy tall and medical degree, but he never got licensed to practice because by the time he graduated from medical school, he was already having a career taking off in his writing novels. So he never actually got officially licensed to practice. So he was never practicing doctor, but he did have the degree, which I think shows in a lot of his work.
Yeah, I was gonna say there was like a little right away. There's something medical, like somebody who's in the medical field, their viewpoint right away.
So, if you were to guess, what novel do you think this is numerically? Like, what novel of his that he wrote?
Oh wow, that's a good question. I would say like 10.
17th novel.
Wow, 17 novels published.
Yeah, before this, including Congo, including Sphere, including the Andromeda Strain. Even the Andromeda Strain was his sixth novel. He wrote his first is a novel called Odds On under the pseudonym John Lang, and he continued to write under that pseudonym basically until he wrote the Andromeda Strain. That was the first one that he wrote as Michael Crichton. And I wonder if that has something to do with maybe because he was thinking he was going to end up being a medical doctor. I don't know. But yeah, interesting. I mean, the guy's got a storied career. I think it's kind of inspiring to know that you can write such a landmark novel that kind of like later in your career. I mean, because if you think about it, he died in 2018. This was written in 1990. So 28 years, so he was pretty far along in his career at that point. Right. And to write kind of the thing you'd be known for. I don't know. There's sometimes this misconception out there where like young writers are all that's like hot. You know what I mean? And then like after you've been doing it for a while, same thing probably with directors,
exactly.
Right? Like,
so it's like it's a lot of stress on being like if you don't do it when you're young, like you might never do it, and just like people having the perseverance to actually keep doing it for their whole lives. I mean, you see guys. I mean, think about the fact. I mean, this is a really bad example. The example is Roger Deakins. It's a really bad example. I'm just going to drop it because he still had stuff that was nominated, but I was going to say like he didn't get his Oscar until he was like 70 something.
Yeah. And honestly, this isn't a great example because I'm doing the math right now, and you subtract 28 from 66 means he was 38 when he wrote this novel. So he was actually pretty young.
Yeah. Well,
he's in his 30s. I mean.
Oh well. But it's a good sentiment because there are people who do
all
it.
This.
I mean, it's a good sentiment because people do it later in life.
But yes, you can do it later in life because he went on to have more successful novels after this. But I think we should save some of his bio because I have a feeling we're going to return to Crichton. I think he's going to be kind of like I don't know, Stephen King. Maybe not quite Stephen King, but someone kind of like Stephen King or Philip K. Dick, who we're going to end up revisiting, Right. So let's save a little bit. I'm sure there's a lot more I can find out about this guy, but for now, I think let's move on. All right. So before we get into, I guess, the summary, do you have any sort of general thoughts you want to give about how this novel begins, about what we get here? Maybe in comparison to the movie, although I want to keep movie comparisons light because I really want to try and deal with this novel, kind of in a vacuum as much as possible, which I know is going to be impossible.
Yeah, like I said before, there's things that are picked from the story that Spielberg used in the actual film. That and also some of the characters are dropped off. Some of the characters are a little different than they are in the movie.
Oh, for sure.
It's something that I realized right away. There's some people like Ian Malcolm is a lot less charming than.
Yeah, that's probably a part of the effect of the casting, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I'm with you there. I think the style is interesting to note. I think there's a lot more attention, in my opinion, to kind of the nitty-gritties of the science and the genetics in this book so far, at least, than there is in the movie. Now, I'm not to say that there isn't. You know what I mean? They talk about it, but it's just like it's really he seems to be like really into it. And then
the genetics and like even like business aspects or like specifics to like paleontology.
And then, I mean, it's also, I would say, seems like it's darker right off the bat. I mean, we see children getting attacked. We see vicious wounds described pretty graphically. Yeah, I think there's kind of maybe not horror, but definitely like a more adult kind of darker vibe to this, which like I'm here for. I love it.
I will say that the movie is it because I kind of forget, but like the movie starts pretty dark as well because we kind of get the same scene that we get. We just don't get the medical perspective of it. We get it actually happening.
That's true. Yeah, the guy getting attacked. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it sounds like we're ready to get into the what actually happens here. So, if you've always been curious, like what the Jurassic Park book is like, just listen to this, and we're going to tell you. Yeah. So it starts out with something called the engine incident, and well, actually, it's kind of interesting because it kind of starts out with a little bit of talk about like the biotech revolution And it's interesting because the POV is kind of unspecific. It's almost like a narrator talking to us just for the very early on. And it talks about how there's like a lack of policy covering all of these like genetic engineers, how there's no watchdogs, and how these scientists are all kind of out there for profit and not necessarily for like more noble pursuits. It really sets the table for this like science-based thriller, right? And it's also scary. And I think it would have been even more frightening at the time. You know what I mean? Whereas like now, well, I don't know. I guess I'm still worried about it. But like I can look back and go, oh yeah, it wasn't as big a like worry as he maybe was making it out to be at the time.
Yeah. But it's also somewhat, some of this stuff I feel like in 90, I mean, obviously I was born in 93, so like I didn't catch a lot of like what it was like to be an adult back then, but like I feel like a lot of this stuff wasn't really as known to the public. So like the idea of like genetically modifying stuff and dealing with like, you know, making drugs or whatever they end up doing with some of this pharmaceutical companies or whatever they're doing, it just seems like it seems a lot scarier because you don't really know how it's made, you know?
Yeah, I think what you're talking about too is that this book came out at a time in which this kind of research was really new, and people were probably just starting to get some of these news stories, right, of things being cloned and genetic manipulation. And I mean, I can guarantee you, people were afraid of it. You know what I mean? Like at the same time as some people were like, "Oh, this is cool." I guarantee, a lot of people frightened of the potential of this kind of science and where it might go wrong. And I mean, they still are today. So that's what I'm saying. I confidently say that was a thing. So for this book to come out and it kind of capitalize on that fear, and give it a face in Jurassic Park, I mean, it's brilliant. It's a clever marketing. It's a clever. It's just. We talk all the time in writing about how most people don't have an idea that is so good that it's just gonna, like, you know, it's gonna sell because you hear that idea and you go, oh my god, that is amazing. This is one of those books, right? Like, I can just imagine he tells this to his editor or to whoever when he's pitching, and he'd already had a history of making some pretty amazing novels that were made into films, and someone's money signs just fucking like popped out of their eyes like a cartoon when they heard this, because it's just a brilliant idea.
I need to look further into this for our movie episode, but I'm pretty sure that Steven Spielberg jumped on the movie rights before the actual book dropped.
Oh, I believe it. I mean, he did that with Ready Player One, right? We were talking about. So I can totally see him doing that.
Just like the idea that Spielberg was like, that's a $1 million idea. You know what I mean? Not more than $1 million idea.
$1 billion idea.
He cashed in. He was like, holy shit, I'm going to get that. And like famously, I think he swooped in and got it out from underneath James Cameron.
Really? I didn't know that. Well, we'll have to get into more of that for the movie episode. Michael Crichton he starts blurring the lines between fiction and truth pretty early here. He talks about real incidents that happened, with companies doing things shady and doing this sort of under the table research and all this stuff. And then he starts mixing in fictional elements from this fictional company, InGen, right? So I think that's also brilliantly done. And it really sets the table. And then we get the prologue, which is called The Bite of the Raptor. And this is what you were talking about earlier. So instead of seeing it happen, we basically get a doctor who has a helicopter shows up with someone who's been injured, and it's a mystery injury, and they say it was caused by construction, like a big machine. And she is treating him, and she notices that the wounds are like swelling and irritated, and there's this like saliva or like gross frothiness all over it, and he looks like he's been mauled, and she keeps saying like this seems like an animal attack and doesn't believe what's being said. And then they end up stealing like her camera where she takes pictures of it. They steal that and they leave with the guy when he dies, and they take his body away on the helicopter. And I don't know, it's cool. And then she also before the man dies, he says the word raptor to her.
Well, he's saying it in another language as well. He's saying like El Raptor.
El Raptor, yeah. And she has to like look it up and find out what it is, and she finds out that it's kind of seems like it's maybe a name for like a child predator in Spanish, and then she also finds out that it's a word in English and that it means basically bird of prey. Mm-hmm. And that's where we end the prologue there.
I thought this was like a hell of a way to start the story because I didn't remember it starting like this. I thought it would start very similarly to the movie. I just thought it was so cool that like there was like people because they were mentioning something else also like it was some sort of Spanish name. I can't remember what it is now.
Yeah, it was like this monster that steals children.
Right, and so I was like, okay, like that mixed with the fact that like raptor means some sort of like child abduction thing. Mm-hmm. I thought that was really a strong start, and like the mystery is like immediately sets off like like a powder keg, just like boom. Everything's here, and like you're already kind of because it's called Jurassic Park and there's dinosaurs on the front. You're like, okay, well, like what's happening here? And they're saying raptor and stuff.
Yeah, it's weird because like I've seen the movie, so I know what's coming. But it is kind of cool to put myself in the like, what if I had picked up this book and know nothing about it other than seeing maybe the title,
Yeah.
And how like what would I be thinking?
Do you think that there was a time? Do you think that this movie had such an impact on culture? Because I guarantee you, if you walk outside right now and ask somebody what a raptor is, they know what it is. Do you think that this movie was part of the reason and impact why people know what raptors are and that kind of thing now?
Oh,
she didn't
undoubtedly know. The amount of interest in paleontology and in dinosaurs skyrocketed from this movie. But you could also argue that the raptor that we see in the movie, we should get into this, famously is not what like a real raptor was like.
Right.
There's a lot of creative licenses taken with a lot of the dinosaurs we see in the film. I'm going to be interested to see how they are in the book. If there's, you know what I mean? Like how much of it is Crichton changing it and how much of it was Spielberg changing it.
Yeah. Well, I've already noticed a lot of him like really talking about the fact that like the raptors are very bird-like and a lot of the reptiles are, you know what I mean? Like it seemed like he was on the right path, and then he was kind of talking about how I don't know if he said anything about feathery, but I feel like like that was like the leading edge of the research at the time was like maybe they had feathers and that kind of thing. And I don't know if it was like known at that point.
No, and I don't think it was. I mean more like the raptors were known to not be nearly as large as they are in the films.
Yeah, like half the size as the movies.
Yeah, they were much smaller. And the animals that they have in the film are actually like basically a different dinosaur that didn't have as cool of a name. And so a similar kind of dinosaur, but I don't remember the exact one. But they took Velociraptor because it was the cooler sounding name, and they gave it to the larger version. You know what I mean?
I think Velociraptors do have the claw, though.
No, they do. They're just small. Like they're not.
So you're just saying they made a Velociraptor bigger, like other.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There's another kind of so that class of dinosaur. See, this is me getting way out of my depth. But there's a class of dinosaur of these kind of predators that all have similar builds and similar claws, and they eat similar things, and they vary in size.
Yeah, I wish 8-year-old me was here.
Yeah, no, right? He'd know. You know what? It'd be like 8-year-old you and 8-year-old me should have a podcast in which we talk about this.
Dinosaurs, yeah, we just call it
the Dino Hour. And they'd be way more knowledgeable than we are right now about the dinosaurs, at least. But yeah, I don't know. I'll do some more research, I guess, for future episodes. I don't really like talking out of my ass more than usual, so I think let's move on. We get first iteration here. We meet Mike Bowman, who's driving down the road in Cabo Blanco, going to a isolated beach with his family, his wife, and his 8-year-old daughter. They see a mystery shape dart by the road, and it's kind of foreboding. And then they make it down to the beach, and the daughter wanders off, and the wife's worried about her daughter wandering off. But he is not. He's like, oh, it'll be fine. Don't worry about it. There's basically nothing she can get into trouble doing, which, okay. So the girl goes off and meets this little lizard, what she calls it, and then she notices that it stands on its hind legs. It's about the size of a chicken. And it leaves 3-toed prints in the ground. She notices, and because she's very observant, we find out. And then kind of flash over to the parents. They hear the daughter screaming, and they run over and find that Tina has been attacked. And then we see her being treated later in the doctors for her pretty vicious attacks all over her arm from this little dinosaur. And this is I immediately realized that this is something that got moved to the Lost World, which I think is what you're talking about, right?
That's what I was going to ask you, is if this felt familiar, because this is the start of Lost World. And I think it's a powerful start. Again, like I think they were smart to move that over to Lost World, because it's solid. Like to think that like, oh, they're escaping. Like the dinosaurs aren't necessarily just on Isla Nublar.
Yeah, right off the bat, this is proof that the dinosaurs have gotten off the island. So yeah, I wasn't necessarily expecting that. I wasn't necessarily expecting this early to see the evidence of this sort of thing, right? Mm-hmm. It like already feels like it's out of control, I guess, is what this shows me, right?
Yeah.
So we meet Dr. Gutierrez and Dr. Cruz. Dr. Cruz is the one working on the daughter, I believe, and Dr. Gutierrez is this expert who comes in to try and classify the animal that attacked her. And
Right.
he convinces everybody that it's this rare lizard called the striped basilisk. And says that it's uncommon for them to bite people, but it's not uncommon for lizards to bite people. And he kind of reassures everybody that that's what it is. And then they halt the analysis of the saliva. And the clerk actually throws out a bunch of the samples, except for one, which he does send to a lab. Tina ends up surviving her ordeal, but she doubles down on her report that there was 3 toes, which Dr. Cruz reports to Dr. Gutierrez, who says he's like that can't be possible. She must be making a mistake, but it kind of throws a lot of uncertainty into what he was so sure about.
Yeah, lizards with 3 toes haven't been around for millions of years.
So then Gutierrez goes out to the beach himself, near the spot of the attack, because he's having second thoughts. And even though he's convinced everybody that this was just this lizard, he's like, I don't know anymore, because he's looking at this picture that Tina drew, that looks like it's drew a dinosaur. So when he's out there, he finds this howler monkey comes out at one point, and it's got the remains of a lizard that looks very similar to the one described by the girl, and he's able to get some of the remains of this lizard away from the howler monkey, which he shoots with a dart, and then he's going to send it off to a lab because it's very unusual. I don't know, just all this stuff's cool. Like I love the like kind of trickle and like slow build, right, of the reveal of the dinosaurs and the like all these experts are starting to pick up on something going on.
Yeah.
I don't know, I think it's cool. The book jumps around a lot and different POVs, a lot of different POVs early on. I mean, we get tons, right? And so we get Dr. Richard Stone in New York at the lab. They get this unidentified lizard, and they handle this sample. They do some analysis of it, and they send a fax back to Gutierrez, which says that there's no communicable diseases found in the body, and he feels like his theory about the lizard being some sort of mutation of the original is confirmed by the lab, but it's not actually. They just kind of go with what his presumption is because it's ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
Oh, so right now we get this little cutaway to another little scene of a midwife, and this is creepy. She hears this like chirping. She's with a new mother, and she hears this chirping from another room, and she goes in and she finds 3 dark lizards crouched over like a cradle. And they're crouched like gargoyles, and they have blood dripping from their mouths. And she sees them tearing flesh from this baby, and she like scares them off. But the baby's been killed, and literally, the dinosaurs have eaten the face of an infant.
Yeah.
So when I say dark and like a little more adult than the movie, this is what I'm talking about. Like this is pretty intense stuff.
Oh yeah, it was cool because it's like all this stuff is happening on like the islands, like Costa Rican islands,
yeah,
or
surrounding islands,
just different islands, and it's really interesting to see how I think that this is a different island than the other attack, so it's spread to multiple islands, seemingly.
Yeah, well, there's been all these rumors about babies and children getting attacked by these weird lizards. Mm-hmm. It's like an outbreak of these new lizards, and she reports it as SIDS because she's afraid of getting into trouble. So no one ever learns like what actually happened to this baby, which. Seems almost implausible that you know what I mean, because like the baby got his face chewed off. Right. Like, does no one ever see this baby?
Right. She would have to take care of the body.
You would, yeah. Who knows? But like it really shows the stakes of this kind of experimentation and also like how bad things can go. I don't know. It makes the dinosaurs frightening early on.
Well, yeah, and I mean, just to think like people are worried about invasive species and stuff. Like these would be an extremely invasive species. Like period. Like any kind of dinosaur gets out. So, I mean, I'm sure that I don't know. I don't really know enough about genetics to say whether or not we could actually somehow make some sort of like extinct creature, like some version of some extinct creature with any DNA that we have.
You know, it's funny because I'm always reading articles that come out. Like I know over the last like 10 years, there's been articles put out on the internet that's like confirmed that, there's no way to bring back the DNA of dinosaurs. Like, it's impossible, right? And then, like, a few years later, I'll see a new one that's like, previously thought impossible. Now there's a hint that this could actually work. And then, so, like, I feel like there's a back and forth, and I don't know what the current, like you said, I don't know the current standing of, like, genetic research is. But I just feel like, to me, never say never, because that's, like, with current technology, and you just never know what technology is going to be like down the road. And I don't know. It's interesting to think of the plausibility of this happening.
I mean, if it's possible, I will say that eventually it will be done. So,
right, exactly. If it's possible, I agree. Someone will do it.
Maybe it hasn't been done to this point because this movie's like fresh in people's minds, and they're like, maybe we shouldn't release this. But also, I don't think that would stop a lot of people.
Well, I mean, this also just goes to show you can talk about the role that sci-fi plays in society, and we can look at this book and this movie and like similar to, like, say, Terminator, right? Mm-hmm. Something like that, and say that it's a cautionary tale that scientists are, see and go, okay, if I'm going to do this, I need to make sure I do it right, and I'm not creating a disaster, right? Yeah. And whether it's AI or genetic, experimentation or what have you, I think sci-fi can play a pretty important role there in sort of cautionary tales, even while they're kind of coming up with new ideas that can also drive research. It's interesting to think about also as it being kind of a warning about the bad shit that can go on. And that's definitely what I get from this book, because this book feels very much to me like it's trying to warn you about things that can happen.
Yeah, I agree.
So this is the first time we actually hear the word dinosaur describing these lizards. A technician just kind of comes in and sees the picture that the girl drew and goes, oh, yeah, that's a dinosaur. Who drew the picture of the dinosaur? And that kind of, like, lights a fire under him where he's like, oh, my gosh, I have to find out if this is even possible, because it seems impossible. So he sends the sample to the Museum of Natural History.
He sends it to a bunch of experts, right?
He sends it to a bunch of experts, yeah. So that's kind of like setting the stage for the second iteration, which we're about to get into. So before we get into the second iteration, I thought we'd just stop and tell you about Audible.
Audible is a great service. They have something like 80,000 audiobooks in their collection, and they've been nice enough to give us an affiliate link. It's audibletrial.com/ink2film.
Yeah, and if you use that link to sign up for their service, you will receive one free book and a free 30 days to listen. I also want to make sure I emphasize that book is now yours forever. It doesn't disappear at the end if you cancel or anything like that. But at the end of 30 days, they'll charge you again, and when they charge you, or they'll charge you the first time, and when they charge you, you'll get another book. Right, so it's a cool service. I've been a member for years, like literally, and listened to probably 100 books on there or more. I'm listening to this one right now, and that's what I just wanted to say. Like, they have tons of Michael Crichton books on here. If you're a Michael Crichton fan, you can find all kinds of books on here. They have Jurassic Park, they have Lost World, they have a newer one called Dragon Teeth, which I don't know much about, but there's like a dragon, maybe a dragon head or a dinosaur head on the front. I don't know.
I remember when that came out, and there was like the whole thing about like whether it was Jurassic Park related or not, and like maybe it might be. I'm not really sure though. I never.
I don't know. Well, there's also Sphere. There's also Timeline. There's also Andromeda Strain. There's also Congo. Just so many. Like literally, there's like over 50 that I'm seeing on this list. So yeah, if you're a Michael Crichton fan, get on Audible, man. You can listen to his books. Listen to. Any other book that you might be interested in. They have a huge collection, tons of famous novels on there. And if you're going to do that, use our link. It's audibletrial.com/ink2film. All right, second iteration, we meet Dr. Alan Grant, which I love Alan Grant in the movie, so I was excited to see him. He's a little different in the book.
He's a little more like rough, like super hyper manly, right?
Yeah, he's very, very manly. But I mean, like that is some of that's similar. Like his being distrustful of technology is similar. The way he's kind of a man's man, and he's very much into being an outdoorsman, and he kind of turns his nose up at academia. So that's interesting. I think that there's a little bit of an undercurrent of anti-academia, you could almost argue anti-science. And it's weird because it's like this book is science-based, but it feels a little bit like it's also at least warning us about science, right?
Yeah, I can definitely see the warning of silence.
like
science.
overreach.
Overreach of science, like overreaching into stuff that you can't really control. I felt like the Alan Grant being against academia and like the way that he's described to like go to lectures in jeans and like all that kind of stuff, very much like casual and likes to be outdoors, likes to do his job that he does, which is paleontology and digging up bones. I felt like he was like that because the almost exact opposite of that is Ian Malcolm, because he's like very academic, he's like a rock star mathematician, and then he's like very like in the academic role and kind of from what I know and what I know in the movie, he kind of doesn't like to really get his hands that dirty.
Yeah, I mean, it really you immediately get the idea that like this is the man you would want to be with if you were if you were in Jurassic Park, right?
Yeah,
because his knowledge isn't just theoretical; it's hands-on. Right, and he's really thought about these animals as animals and not just as like an idea. It's setting him up kind of perfectly to be our like main protagonist, I guess, and that's definitely the feeling I'm getting from him. So when we meet him, they're on this dig and they're finding like baby carnivores, baby fossils, and when they're there, this guy comes from the EPA named Bob Morris, and Grant invites him inside and they have a drink, and Ellie Sattler is also introduced. And I got to call out Michael Crichton a little bit here. This is some of the shit that we're trying to get away from in the writing community. When Ellie is first introduced, she's hypersexualized. We see Bob Morris is basically ogling her, and Grant is kind of like, nice. And she's wearing like cutoff jeans, and she chugs a beer, which like both guys are just like, oh my God, and they're kind of in awe of her. And it's like, I get that like you're like, it's okay to make her a potential love interest and to make her to be like she's attractive, but we also have to remember she's a doctor, paleobotanist. She's just as qualified as everybody else, and they aren't being described in these ways, so it's very male gaze, right?
Definitely.
And it's a bummer. I don't know. Like I guess I'm glad that I'm aware of it now, because I feel like this is the kind of thing I wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't, you know what I mean? If I hadn't heard about people saying like, this is kind of bullshit that this is always like this.
Right. Well, like back when this book came out, it was very much like that. It was, people, It was like, I guess, just less woke, I don't know what it was in society that had people not realize, but it's so blatantly obvious to us now.
Well, and it is a long time ago, but it's also not that long ago. It was 1990,
Oh, no, it's just like, for whatever reason,
it's not the 50s, like you were talking about with like Bradbury, right?
Oh, no. And he should have known better, but it's still like, I mean, it's probably been not very long at all since people have started to really become like sensitive to these things and start realizing. It's just so funny because we read it now and it's laughable to me. Like, it's funny that he like decides that this is how you introduce a female character. It just seems so old school and it's not that old, like you said.
Yeah, well, and it's like a direct appeal to male readers, and I don't know. I assume he's probably doing some of this stuff subconsciously, but like, women read more than men do. That's been proven. Now, I don't know if that's true for thrillers in particular, because that does feel like maybe a lot of men read thrillers. But I don't know. It just seems alienating to an audience. So in that sense, it's also a bummer. Like, just why do that? I don't know. And like, guys don't need help thinking of women as attractive. You know what I mean? Straight guys who are going to read this book. So it's not like you have to do this to like make them think, oh, she's hot.
Right.
I don't know. And yeah, it's like, it's one thing to describe her as attractive, but it's another thing to have Grant be like, yeah, this is kind of how my life is. And he's like, yeah, Ellie keeps us entertained out here. And then Bob Morris is basically ogling her, and Grant's like, nice. Like, it's just like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It was too much. But let's move on. We learned that Ellie is a paleobotanist, and Grant is a professor of paleontology, although he's much more of an outdoorsman, which we talked about. He has contempt for people he calls teacup dinosaur hunters, who are the academics who, sip tea, I guess, and talk about dinosaurs. And Bob Morris says that the EPA has concerns about the Hammond Foundation. And this is the first time we get to talk about rich old Hammond and his island, right? Mm-hmm. And we start hearing talk about, like, he's been doing some things that are a little shady and a little bit behind the scenes, and he's worried that he's breaking laws and that he's gathering all this like technology, and he's got some sort of genetics lab off the books, basically.
Yeah, he's shipping it all out to like some Costa Rican island in order to circumvent all those laws and anything that was in place to stop him from doing everything he wanted to do.
Yeah, so there's a lot of talk about like different experiments that have been done over time without regulation and out of the sight of all governments, and how this is a dangerous thing. And Bob Morris is worried about it. And so he's kind of investigating them, and he's been going around and asking people a lot of questions. And Grant, we learn, has been receiving money from the Hammonds as a consultant, and he's been giving them information about baby dinosaurs, which he obviously thinks is very like theoretical, and doesn't realize that the reason they're asking is because they're clearly trying to feed baby dinosaurs.
Yeah, they'll like call at like 3 a.m, he said at one point, and like ask like what theoretically what this kind of dinosaur would eat, and he's just like kind of guessing.
Yeah, and it is fun to think that it's just so ridiculous, the idea that there could be a live dinosaur it honestly just like never enters his mind, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, how could it?
Yeah. I mean, especially as someone who's kind of a Luddite like him, who is probably is not up to date on genetics, and like all this stuff. Like, it's literally just him thinking, what are the chances a dinosaur is still alive? And as we come to learn, like astronomically to negative almost, basically zero.
Yeah.
It's not impossible, because like they talk about later, 65 million year old, species of things that were thought to be extinct, and then they find, like a fish, but extremely unlikely. Grant also, after Bob Morris leaves, he gets on the phone with a Mrs. Levin from this lab, and she wants him to look at this X-ray, which shows the remains of the dinosaur that we know that was found with the howler monkey and all that. And he's like, "Oh my God, this thing is a dinosaur, and it is from the Triassic period." Which I love that they're talking about Jurassic period, Cretaceous, like all that stuff, because like that reminds me of being like a little nerd kid.
Yeah.
And I knew all that stuff, and I love that he talks about how this is like the oldest. So this isn't 65 million years old. This is like 200 million years old, and that's why he feels like it's impossible that it would still be here, right?
Yeah.
And he does also mention that how sharks and crocodiles are like leftovers from that time, though. Now they're basically the same now as they were then, which is also cool to think about.
Yeah, that's one of the coolest things, that when you go to see, whenever you go to the zoo and you look at a crocodile, that's literally a dinosaur.
Yeah, basically. So Hammond calls, and he's asking about this EPA guy who's been causing trouble. And then he mentions how he purchased the Isla Nublar Island 4 or 5 years ago, and that he has a park that's going to be opening there next year, and he invites them to come down for the weekend. And he says, I think it's going to be right up your alley. And he tells them that if they come, him and Ellie both should come, and that he's going to pay them $20,000 a day to fly down there for the weekend.
Which is way more than my day rate right now.
Which, yeah, my day rate is a little bit less than that. But you know what? If you have that offer, we can talk. We can discuss it.
Yeah.
I'll fly to just about anywhere for $20,000 a day.
Would you fly to Jurassic Park for $20,000 a day? Is a good question. We should revisit.
Yeah, let's save that for the end. Let's talk about would you do it.
Okay.
So next we meet Donald Gennaro, who is Hammond's lawyer, and he's not nearly as likable, I guess, as the other kind of lawyer guy we've met here. Morris was a lawyer for the EPA, right? I'm not misremembering that.
I think so. Yeah. He's some sort of representative of the EPA.
Sort of legal counsel or something. Yeah. So we meet Gennaro, who's saying that he's like, we can't trust Hammond anymore, and he's speaking to
Daniel Ross.
Ross, yeah. So it seems like they're kind of going against Hammond here, even though they work for him. He talks about the report of like a strange lizard that's been biting children, and they discuss Ian Malcolm, who is going to go on this. They're talking about how a bunch of experts are coming down to the island, and Ian Malcolm's going to be among them. This is the first time we really hear about Ian Malcolm, who's this mathematician, right? Coming to inspect the island. So next we get Ellie. She's got blueprints for the park. This is something that Hammond had sent them, and they're looking it over, and they're like amazed that it looks like a resort or like a tourist area. It's actually surprisingly detailed. They see that there's electric fences, and they see all the different areas, but they don't know why and like what's going on.
Right. Eventually they come to the conclusion that like it seems like some sort of zoo, but they still haven't put all the pieces together.
Right. We do get the scene with the children and him using a thumper to like image the skeleton of a velociraptor.
Which,
and
like, these kids that are out there, like, I would have killed to be that kid.
Yeah, it would have been cool. And this one kid also says, "That doesn't look very fearsome." And I was like, "Oh yeah, here we go. This is gonna lay the smack down on him." That's what happens in the movie. It's not really what happens in the book. It's actually he's much cooler about it. He's just like, "Yeah, as a baby, it wouldn't have been very fearsome." And then he kind of just like, actually, I think he just thinks about how it would have been more fearsome. Definitely doesn't pull out like a fossilized claw and menace the child with it.
Great scene, though.
I don't know.
Great scene.
I kind of love that scene, but yeah, we don't get that in the book. He's much more cool about it. We hop over to Gennaro, who's packing up, talking about how he's going to miss his children's birthday party. It's interesting because Hammond later is like, "You should have brought your kids along," and he's like, "Yeah, I guess I could have." And I don't know. After we've seen, like, the only thing we've seen dinosaurs really do so far is attack children. So immediately, as a reader, you're like, "Oh, good thing he didn't bring his kids along."
Good call,
right?
Man. We start to see that Hammond is like a little different than he was in the movie as well, because he's the fact that he was like, "Oh yeah, bring it. You could have brought your kids." Like, he's like, so it almost seems like he's like absent-minded, or like like he can't think of anything except for the park.
Is that different though?
That's true.
That reminds me of movie Hammond as well too. I mean, he brings what is his niece and nephew?
Yeah, true.
Yeah, which he wouldn't have done that if he wasn't completely convinced it was safe, right?
Yeah.
So in the jet, Hammond is riding with Gennaro, and then they end up getting Grant and Ellie. They start joining together. We learned that Hammond is a born showman. Oh, this was interesting. Gennaro's remembering what he used to do with Hammond when they would go around and try and get investors. Mm-hmm. He had a tiny elephant that he would carry with him in a cage, and then he'd pull it out, and it was like this pygmy elephant that was like tiny. Mm-hmm. And it would impress everybody, and they'd get all kinds of, like, it would be like the final step would be to reveal this thing, and everyone would be like, "Oh my God, we gotta invest with you." But then come to find out, it's actually like vicious and unhealthy, and then like it died, and they couldn't replicate it, and all this stuff. So,
and he also like didn't actually genetically. He didn't make it genetically. He grew it from an embryo, and like he did genetically change it, but he didn't do like full on like take. I don't know. It wasn't as specific as what he was going to do with the dinosaurs.
Yeah, so this also shows that a lot of Hammond is kind of bluster, and I don't know. It's interesting, I guess, to see like how much of it he believes, but it makes me not really trust him too, because he's obviously misrepresenting things to like sell it.
Yeah, this what's funny is like this little mini elephant thing is less believable to me for whatever reason than bringing dinosaurs back.
Yeah, a little pygmy elephant. Yeah, that's like that tiny. Yeah, it seems pretty unbelievable. I don't know. Someone's gonna message us and be like, "Actually, that's a real thing," and send us a picture. So
yeah,
who knows?
Well, I know that. Like, okay, so in the movie, at least I remember them talking about how like they had to fill in some of the gaps of genetics to make these dinosaurs.
Frog
and stuff.
DNA. Yeah.
Yeah. So it just seems like bringing something to life rather than altering how it will eventually develop seems harder. You know what I mean? Like making an elephant stay small forever versus like making something and just having it grow naturally however it does seems less I don't know.
I don't know. Like, again, this is like, we need to have a geneticist on, because I think last week we talked about this too for our Fahrenheit 451.
We got to start hiring expert witnesses to come on.
Yeah, we need to start having like our expert, doctors and geneticists and whoever else, microbiologists, on the show. So yeah, if anybody knows anyone like that who would be interested, let us know.
No, definitely, yes. Send them our information, or send us theirs.
Yeah, honestly, yeah. If they wanted to write in, if anybody knows themselves, has like a lot of knowledge about this sort of thing, write in and let us know, and we'll definitely talk about it on an episode. Furthermore, Hammond says they have 238 animals now, 15 different species, which I do think is maybe less than the movie. I feel like there was more than that, but I could be wrong.
I think so. Well, the implication, at least for sure, the implication in the movie is that there's way more than that.
Yeah. So he talks about how the ultimate goal of the park is to make money, and that there's limiting costs by investing in automation and not having a lot of personnel. And a lot of this is different, because this to me feels like Hammond is a lot more of he's a lot more greedy than he seems in the movie to me. Like in the movie to me, he seems a lot more like an idealist who really just like believes in entertaining people and maybe to a fault, I guess. But here he seems a lot more greedy.
Yeah,
I don't know. I'll be interested to see how that if that continues to be the case.
Yeah, his character doesn't seem to be quite like kind of similar to Malcolm. He doesn't seem to be quite as charming, and he doesn't have like that fun-loving like Willy Wonka sense to him. He's more just like a businessman who's trying to be ruthless and do whatever he can to get this park made and like cut corners or do whatever.
So Grant and Ellie, this is when they actually join here. They get on the same plane with Gennaro and Hammond, and Gennaro is immediately surprised that Ellie is a woman. Which is a very 80s, 90s thing to be, I guess. Oh my God, a doctor's a woman? Can't believe it.
Yeah, I did not need to be in there.
Well, I mean, it's also of a time, that is not, I mean, I believe that there are people at that time, in the 90s that would have been, you know what I mean? But nowadays, it's definitely not a thing, so hooray. And some progress has been made. I guess sometimes it's nice to look back and see how backward things were, and then you can look at today and say progress has been made. You know what I mean? As painful and stilted, or not stilted, stunted as it often can be, you can see that there has been progress made, right?
Yeah, but it's also a bummer because it's like we look at it and then we also see like it hasn't come all that far, it's like people are starting to realize that things are wrong, but like, is it, you know what I mean? Have hearts and minds all fully changed yet? Like, it's just a bummer.
And it can be a bummer because
people are still stuck in that mentality.
It's like it can be a bummer because it's also kind of it's kind of a sad marker of society that is now attached to some piece of literature that you look back on and you want to enjoy. But like I can't talk about this book without mentioning it, right? Like I can't. Some people can, I'm sure, but to me it's important to talk about. But it does kind of suck, that you just wish that things could have been better. But anyway, now we get the board of directors having this emergency meeting for a company called Biosyn, and they're having a discussion about InGen and how InGen's basically like way ahead of them in genetic and like all this genetic research, and they are good at like reverse engineering other companies' research, and then they can do that. They talked about how they basically designed this pale trout that is like sickly and doesn't and tastes bad, but they sold it to this company and have made money off of that. And they know that what Hammond is up to, right? They've learned, and Dodson has a man on the inside, and basically they have a kind of an informal vote about whether or not to go forward with using this man on the inside. There is talk about merchandising and how they think eventually Hammond is expecting to sell miniature dinosaurs to people as pets. Which we definitely don't get that in the movie. So I wonder if that is actually going to be like a plan that Hammond has, or if that's just them like having wild speculation here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really remember whether it's like a thing that surfaces or not.
Seems wildly irresponsible, if so.
Well, you'd have to give them like extreme herbivores that were non-aggressive, and
Well, and then that's where we're going to get introduced to Ian Malcolm and his chaos theory, right? Mm-hmm. So they're setting up the themes here. So Dodson also meets with his man on the inside, and which it's interesting because his identity is actually kept secret, and we know from the movie who it is, but here in the book you don't know who it is, right? And so what it creates is a sense of mystery where you're reading along and you don't know who is this sort of inside spy.
What do you mean? Because they said his name. Are you saying?
No, they don't ever say his name.
Dude, 100%.
No, they don't. I'm telling you. When he gets on the plane later, he's introduced as Dennis Nedry.
Okay.
But when he's meeting with Dodson, it's just the man. So you don't know that those two people are the same person, is what I'm saying.
Right.
Now, he acts in a similar manner, so maybe there are clues. You know what I mean? Like he's supposed to be like arrogant and kind of over the top. But he's never actually named Dennis Nedry.
Okay, yeah, I can totally see that happening, and just me thinking that like because I have we know his name.
You knew who it was, right? Like you're like, oh, this is Dennis Nedry.
I thought you meant like they never say his name, so we never know. I was like, oh man, they definitely say it in this section somewhere.
They don't say it in that part,
right? So
that later we meet Dennis Nedry, but we don't know that is the same man who met with Dodson,
right,
and agreed to steal the embryos.
It'd be cool to have read this for the first time instead of seeing it.
Because you don't know. You're like, who is that? Is this? Or you're just like, I wonder where that guy is, right?
Right.
So then we meet Malcolm, who is wearing all black, and talks about how he wears black and gray because he's like he doesn't like fashion and he thinks it's a silly thing to have to worry about that in professional sports, and he wears black and gray because it always goes together. And I don't know, it reminds me a little bit of like a Johnny Cash thing almost, but as someone who wears a lot of black, like I get it. But it's also like, I don't know, it's kind of disingenuous because I think it's also a fashion statement to always wear black. So
yeah, well, I mean, I like the idea of I can appreciate fashion, right? And I like to look good. Right. I feel like everybody does, but like I like the idea that like you don't like you're so focused on the things that you know what I mean. It's like one less thing to worry about. I think that's a cool idea. But I don't think I could ever do it personally.
Yeah. It's like, there are people like this who wear the same thing every day, right? They just have like 6 copies of the same outfit and just wear it every day. You know what I mean? Right. And like, there are people like that. And I guess there is kind of a freedom there because no doubt about what you're wearing today. So I get it. We meet Malcolm, and he's kind of, like you said, he's different. Definitely not as likable as Jeff Goldblum as Ian Malcolm. He brings like a real charisma to this role. It's implied, I think, that he is charismatic, but we get a lot more arrogance, and he just rubs me a little bit the wrong way.
Yeah, he's definitely more of a dick, but
we're viewing him a little bit through Grant's eyes as well, right? And Grant doesn't like him.
Yeah. And I still think he's a cool character. Like I like the idea. I still think he's probably one of the coolest characters in the book.
Oh, for sure. And so he describes chaos theory, and in detail. I think it's being set up as what we just talked about, right? We just talked about how sending animals home with somebody, and because you've engineered them to be a certain way, and because they're herbivores, and expecting it to be safe. That is a very linear, to use his thing. Like that's like using a linear equation to describe like, I know all the parameters. I know how it's going to go. It's safe. We can do it. Whereas his whole thing is about unexpected results and how it always occurs in certain sorts of systems.
Right.
And he's predicting that for these dinosaurs. And so he's predicting that if you were to do that, something would go wrong. Something unpredictable would happen.
Yeah. He equates it. I thought he did a great job of explaining chaos theory too, because I was familiar with it. But when he described it in detail, I was like, it's really cool to have that fresh in your mind as you go into this story.
Yeah, it's about the unpredictable thing actually being predictable. It's predictable that something unpredictable will happen. And that's why he's predicted that this park's always going to fail from the beginning. And yeah, like I said, I think this is a primary conflict for this book, right? It's the idea of the forces that think they can control nature, they think they can control these animals, they think they control the genetics, versus the other side, which is Ian Malcolm, and he represents chaos theory, and he represents unpredictability in nature. And right from the beginning, this is being drawn as, I think, the primary conflict of this book, thematic at least, conflict of the book.
Definitely. And like, yeah, I totally agree with you. I was going to say something about the fact that it's kind of this like pseudo nature versus man. And it's like man creating this conflict. And I think you said it pretty eloquently there, so I'll leave it there.
All right, so last section here we get is them arriving on Isla Nublar. They have Dennis Nedry with them, who's been described as fat and sloppy. We're on the island, and we meet some brontosauruses, and it happens like right when they land the helicopter. Basically, they get off the helicopter and they see them immediately, so definitely different. But yeah, it's a cool scene. I don't know if it doesn't live up to me for that moment in the movie. Like that moment in the movie is so iconic, and probably just because like we aren't experiencing it as well and seeing it realized, which you get in a film. And like, I mean, that's why Spielberg reads this and goes, "Oh my God, imagine what I could do with this." You know what I mean? Like he has to.
Such a good moment.
That moment where you see the first dinosaur is just iconic, and we get some of that here, but it just doesn't quite hit you the same,
Yeah, and not to mention John Williams' score helps out a little bit in the film.
Absolutely, man. So there's some talk about how the weather here is a lot like the Pacific Northwest, which made me laugh because that's where I am now. But he says it's a microclimate, and that actually the rest of the island is tropical. This is another example of like details you don't get in the movie, and it's just cool, like all this like science behind it, I guess, where it feels very real to me. Gennaro, when he sees the animals, says, "We're going to make a fortune." I think he actually says something very similar in the movie. Grant feels dizzy, and then he starts laughing because he accepts them immediately as like existing creatures now, and he laughs about that, how like ridiculous it is.
And he's like, they talk about how he's like, he's able to pinpoint all these things immediately about the species and about like all these theories that he had, and I thought that was really cool.
Yeah. And the man named Ed Regis comes out and says, "Welcome to Jurassic Park," essentially. takes them inside. And that's the end of the second iteration here. So, what did you think, man? What did you think of this intro?
Well, it was a struggle to not continue reading for me.
Right. We're at the cusp of like where the really interesting shit goes down.
Yeah,
right?
and like a lot of the corporate espionage is part of the thing that really kept that like struck me through this first part that we read here. And that's like part of the underlying stuff of what I'm really interested in right now. And like obviously the park will become more interesting as we read more. But right now I'm really invested in like the idea that like these guys are trying to get these genes out, and they're going to try to replicate it.
So it's also interesting to me that we haven't met any children yet. I mean, you know what I mean? We haven't met the children from the movie.
Right.
I know you know, so don't tell me. But I'm curious. I'm like, if they're not in this book, then it's going to be a very different book. I assume they are, so we'll see. But yeah, I mean, like I said, darker, more science. Characters are a little different. So it feels it's cool because it's like I'm re-experiencing this thing that I love, and I'm seeing it in a whole new way. So yeah, if we haven't sold you by now, I mean, go read this book. It's really cool. I think it's going to be the best way to experience it. But regardless, we're going to cover it, and I don't know. I'm having a lot of fun, man. I'm really excited to get to the next part as well. I'm with you.
Like you said, it's I think both of one of our favorite films, and it's so much fun to get to see the source material and break it down in a way that we're able to kind of for me, what I do a lot is like I'm really thinking about like what Spielberg was thinking when he was reading it, and what he was thinking, oh, I can change this and I can do this here, and this is such a big moment, and this isn't really necessary for my film. So I love to just like look at it through that lens now. I mean, it's already so much fun. This is such a fun book and such a great story.
All right, so I think I have one last question for you, and that is going to be, would you do it? And I want you to think about that, and we're going to save it for the very end. But what do you think is the most interesting way to couch this? I guess the idea is like today, and we've seen the movie, right? We know about the movie Jurassic Park, but we hear about how they're opening brand new, a Jurassic Park basically type place, and the question is, would you go to it? I guess, right? I think that's the most interesting question. Like, would you go, knowing everything we know from these movies? Would you still go if today they opened one of these bad boys? And yeah, let's save the answer for the end.
I'm just excited that our world famous segment is back. Would you do it?
World famous, yeah. All right. So before that, though, we want to tell you about our Patreon, which we just started a little while ago, and we've gotten some subscribers. We've got some new people who have stepped up to the plate to help us out. We basically launched it because we wanted it to have this thing run itself. And yeah, we just wanted to shout out Mila, who's been along with us since the beginning. She's signed up for our $10 level, which she's going to get some swag in the mail. We're going to be sending those out, by the way, very soon, so you can look for those, patrons. And yeah, we just really appreciate her stepping up and helping fund this thing. Yeah,
I mean, it's such a nice thing to do, and I mean, to support us in such a way, it's really incredible, and we thank you.
It means a lot, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think both of us, it really means a lot that people are willing to do that, because this is something we believe in, and we love seeing that our listeners believe in it too. So yeah, if you wanted to find out more about like how to become a patron, or even just find out what kind of stuff we're offering, go to patreon.com/ink2film, and you can see all that.
Also, if you wanted to interact with us, we're on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, @ink2film. We're active on all those sites. So, I mean, if you want to interact with us, anything you send us, we'll see.
Yeah, and if you happen to be a geneticist or a biologist, or just have information or reactions, whatever it might be, you can send us an email, and that would be sent to ink2film@gmail.com. And we'd love to get any sort of info you guys want to send around, or even just reactions to this episode.
Also, if you wanted to help us out in another way, rating and reviewing would be huge. Whatever service you listen to it on, iTunes, Google Play, if leaving a review helps other people see our podcast, and it kind of just helps spread the word on it.
Yeah, and if you've been meaning to do it, now's the time. As soon as this episode's over, go down, find it on your app, and leave us that review. It's a huge help. We know a lot of people mean to do it and then just don't get around to it, but it would really help us out. Also, on Goodreads, we have a book club. It's just the Ink to Film book club. You can come join that. We have some forums up where we're hoping people start doing some more discussion, talking about these books as we go, any other book that's being adapted, that kind of stuff. So it's just another place where you can come and hang out with other listeners of this podcast.
Yeah, it's cool because it's also, we can connect more personally and see kind of what you guys are reading and if we look into profiles of people who interact with us. So it's kind of, it's a lot of fun over there. We want to say thank you to Audible for giving us that affiliate link. It's audibletrial.com/ink to film. And again, with that, you get 30 free days and 1 free credit for any audiobook in their collection. Also, we'd like to say thank you to Ross Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music.
All right, man. So you get an invitation in the mail. Come on out to Cretaceous Park or whatever it is. Brand new, real live dinosaurs. On there it says super safe. Don't worry about it. What do you do? Do you go?
Well, I mean, so it says super safe. I would want to do a lot of research. I would want to know
it says super safe on there. Come on, what do you need to know?
I would want to know who helped build it and kind of look into their work in the past.
Grand new opening.
I would say, I mean, at the end of the day, like, yes, because I'm seeking that adventure. You know what I mean? I would love to do something like this. Knowing that it would go badly, I would probably hire some bodyguards, even though I know that wouldn't work out. I don't know, man. Yeah. I'd love to see these dinosaurs and like, let's. I'm gonna leave it with the caveat of if I knew that it was gonna go, if somebody could 100% guarantee me that it would be all right, I would go. And then even if they couldn't,
they can
I would
100% guarantee you, but that doesn't mean that doesn't mean the world is guaranteeing you. They can.
But that's what I was gonna say is that 100% guarantee me that I'd be safe. I would definitely go. And then even if they couldn't, I would definitely go. So I think I would go.
So put that on your tombstone.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I'm being kind of tongue in cheek. I would go. Obviously, kind of the coward's way out is I would say I probably wouldn't want to be among the first group to go. I want to make sure that someone else successfully did it. But on the other hand, maybe I would. Like, honestly, I guess I believe that we would probably be able to control it. I don't know if it's a great idea, but like if someone did it, I don't know. I don't know if even after seeing all these movies and reading all these books, I don't know if I'm convinced that it wouldn't be something people could actually control. Maybe
but that's naive. That's the whole point of the book too. Is Michael Crichton saying we're dumb for saying we would go, kind of, because chaos theory.
I'd do it. So
I think I got to take my chances. I love dinosaurs, and it would just be, I don't know, it'd be something that it would be such a massive part of your life to be like, yeah, I saw dinosaurs. Have you done that?
Well, I think that goes back to both 8-year-old us, right? Who both love dinosaurs. Like, you have to take a chance. You gotta go see it.
It's like people who go to space. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true. Dangerous, but people do it.
They had to take that chance.
All right, man. So I think that's going to be it for this week. We're going to come back next week, and we're going to cover, I think, the 3rd, 4th, and 5th iterations, if I remember correctly. At the very least, we're going to be covering the middle chunk of this book, and we'll let you know. But until then, I'm Luke.
And I'm James.
See ya.